People, I wanted to hop on here. I'm on the road, and one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to be able to just kind of share with you a couple of things that I have found to be very, very powerful, really. And it has everything to do with your perspective. And so, while we are on the road and we are, um, I just realized it's going the other way. There we go. Okay, sitting here doing all of this talking, and let me move this down. This is how lives go, right? When you're on the road and you don't have the best of setups, everything can be clunky. Okay, so let's try this again. All right, so here's what I wanted to share that I have found. I've got some notes here, but I wanted to share this, and this is for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you are, living, um, well off. Doesn't matter whether you are the type of person who is saying, you know what, um, I am, trying to reach whatever your pinnacle is. I think there's some things that today I kind of learned in some conversations that I wanted to share with you. And I wanted to just do this live, right? Because I wanted it to be from what I gathered just throughout some thoughts today and some different things that I wanted to be able to provide that here on The World According to Chris. And again, if you are somebody who's struggling or looking to build and start your podcast, your side business, this is the podcast for you. I'm telling you that right now. But here's the thing I want you to think about. What if you're right? I just want you to think about that for a second. What if you're right? Like you might be. You might actually be right. So, what comes to mind when you hear someone like me right now say, what if you're right? For most people, when they hear that, they typically hear a, or they process that with some negative outcome, right? Meaning, what if you're right? And maybe they're thinking about, if I try this, I'm gonna fail. Or if I do this thing, it's gonna go wrong. Or I tried that and it didn't work before, so why am I gonna try it again? Or whatever, right? Like, what if you're right? And I really want us to stop and think about not about what if you're right. I want you to think about the automatic programming that you're running. Like, what is your operating system that you're running when you hear me say, what if you're right? I want you to think about what is the first thing that happens inside of your body when you hear me say, what if you're right? Do you tense up? Do you feel a little anxious? Do you see that as a potential, problem? Are you running a bunch of negative scenarios in your head just because you heard me say, hey, what if you're right? And if you did, I want to provide some perspective that I think is so important. Do you know that no matter what you do, no matter what you encounter, the perspective by which you are using during that particular experience is the cloak and the reality that you are living? It's the perspective. Because we all know this is true, right? Like two people could be looking at the same scenario and see two totally different things. We know that's true. So when we have that happen, what that means is that the that means that the perspective by which you view an experience or have an experience or see something from a distance or whatever the case may be is what's most important. I truly believe that our perspective is the human superpower. It is really a human superpower. If you put 100 of us in a room right now and we all saw the same picture, we would probably have close to 100 different ways of looking at it. At least half, more than half the people would be thinking differently about it. If we all went through the same monetary situation, we all would have different perspectives. If we all suffered a loss of some sorts, we would all have a different perspective, right? Perspective is, can I draw this? Let me draw this out, because obviously you're seeing this. I want to show you what I mean by perspective, okay? Because this is pretty cool. So let's say um, um, I'm gonna put I'm gonna write the word, um, and I'm terrible at spelling, so don't judge me. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write the word scenario, okay? So this is the scenario, and I want you to look at the scenario, okay? This is the scenario, all right? This is the scenario. So we all have a scenario that we're going through, right? I want to show you what perspective looks like. You see scenario? There's scenario. Let me show you what perspective looks like. I want to show you what perspective looks like because I want us to truly get a glimpse. You see that? Perspective is actually the frame that we use to come to a decision about the scenario. Okay? Perspective is the frame that we place on top of our moment, our experience. Do you realize we're doing that all day, every day, though? Like we're framing the moment. Like, I want to also share with you some things. Gosh, my thing here is going sideways. All right, I want to share with you what perspective does uh, to us. Let me fix this. I'm trying to get this right, y'all. Bear with me as I'm you know away from home and trying to use whatever tools that I have. Let me just set this right here. That's y'all. Okay. Okay, perfect. So here's what perspective does. Okay? Perspective does a few different things baked to the scenario that we're encountering. Remember, perspective is the frame that we put on top of the scenario. I want to show you what perspective does. The first thing that perspective does is perspective tells us, I'm just going to write these down, what something means. That's the first thing, okay? Perspective tells us what something means. And you can write this for yourself. Like, I want you to draw this out if you're watching this, because I think you'll have a better, powerful experience if you do it yourself as well, okay? So the first thing is the perspective tells us about the scenario, what something means. And this is getting terrible. I really thought I had this earlier, and clearly, as I'm getting later in the day, my 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 technology is not moving the best. Okay, all right. Let's see if that'll stay up. Hopefully it does. If it doesn't, I'll change it. Clearly, things are not flowing the way I would like them to. But that's the problem. But I'm gonna get this out. Don't worry. Don't worry. You're gonna get all of this information because I do think it's important. Like I really, really do. Let's see. Can I move something else? I'm trying to get it to sit right, y'all. Give me a second. This is what happens when you go live in a hotel room and your quote unquote kickstand is not being your friend right now. Right? Okay. I think I got it now. Okay. All right. Back to what I'm saying. Okay. So perspective, right? Perspective is important. Uh, it is the frame of your scenario, right? It frames your scenario. And I'm gonna make these a little bigger as well. And then the first thing that perspective does is it tells you what something means, right? So think about it, right? You've experienced, you're having an experience, right? And based on whatever perspective you have, it is the frame by which you perceive that particular scenario. And the first thing that it tells you is it tells you what something means. Now, here's the crazy part. Let's say if you've always had a fear of heights as a child, so you spent the last 23 years of your life never going any higher than 10 feet off the ground because you have a fear of heights, right? Even though you grew since you were age 7, your perspective is heights scare me. So any scenario where you get higher than 10 feet, your perspective is already telling you don't ever do that again because I'm afraid, right? So the I'm afraid is the what something means. Hopefully that makes sense, right? So another thing that perspective also assumes the next time. So not only does perspective tell you what something means, it assumes the next time. And I want you to write this as well. This is a really cool exercise, okay? So you have a scenario. The frame that you look at that scenario is the perspective. And the first thing that perspective gives you is it tells you what something means. The second thing that it does is it assumes the next time. So let's use this fear of heights example, right? You were 7 years old, you got, I don't know, in an air balloon or whatever, right? Got on a plane or, and you looked down, or you crossed a bridge one time and it was very high, and at age 7, you spent 23 years of your life, or, 30 years of your life, never doing anything higher than that bridge because what it told you was, I'm afraid of heights. That's what it means to you. That's scary. But then it assumes the next time, which means the next time I'm above that, height again, in the case of the scenario being afraid of heights or being in a high situation where now I'm afraid, it assumes that every time I have that scenario in my life, guess what? I'm afraid. It's already painted up. The perspective has already told you that for the rest of your life, you're going to be that way. So never, in this case with the heights, never put yourself in a position again to be in a place where you're in a high ceiling, a high staircase, a high rise building, and look down, whatever the case may be, right? Because the one time at 7 years old, the frame of that moment has told you, it's assuming for the next time, don't ever do that again, right? So you don't do it. Here's the third thing, and I'm gonna show you why I think this is really cool. So, okay, you got the word scenario on your paper, like mine, right? You got the word scenario. You draw a box around it. That's the perspective. The first thing that it does is it tells you what something means. The second thing is that it assumes the next time. Here's the third thing that perspective does, okay? The third thing that perspective does is that it gives you, and I'm writing this down because I want you to do the same thing, right? Like draw this out, like literally, just draw this out. It gives you a feeling. Okay? So the third thing that perspective does is it gives us a feeling, right? So I was 7 years old. I stepped on a bridge. I looked down and it was high and I got nervous and I started sweating and I decided not to do it, right? Again. So now my perspective of anything that's higher than 10 feet is I'm afraid. That's my perspective. I shouldn't do it anymore. That is crazy, whatever you tell yourself, right? So it told you what it meant. I'm afraid. It assumed that the next time I do this, I'll feel the same way. And it gives you a feeling. So what is the feeling? The fear, the pit sweats, right? The headaches, the nervousness. This is why I'm saying perspective is such a superpower. I think it is the human superpower. Like, honestly, it is a human superpower to have perspective. So why talk about this? What do we do? I asked you the question at the beginning of this. I said, what if you're right? And as I said, sometimes our default operating model is that of something of the worst, right? Our default operating model might be just a negative consequence. So it's not necessarily the scenario that we place ourselves in. It's the perspective by which we look at that perspective that is important. That's why I say I think perspective is the human superpower. How do I know? The person at 7 years old who was afraid of heights can also be the same person who chose to conquer their fear, and now they've climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Makes sense, right? Let's run through our example. So the scenario at age 7, that person, they were afraid of heights. But maybe somewhere in life they just got sick of being afraid of it, and they didn't run from the scenario. They challenged their perspective by going and climbing things. The scenario didn't change. It's heights, right? Different versions of heights, but it was heights. So for the person who's 7 and chose that the height situation was a fear, and they were going to do everything to avoid it. So what it meant to them is that they were afraid. They assumed that the next time I do it, I'm also going to be afraid. So they avoid it at all costs. And then it gave them a feeling, the pit sweats, the sleepless, the irritation, the nervousness, the whatever, right? And they speak from anytime somebody's telling you about their perspective, you notice they tell you about the feeling. They're giving off the feeling that they have, right? This is why I say perspective is a great superpower. It is a great superpower. All right. So why am I bringing this up? Let's go back to the question I posed at the beginning of this broadcast. What if you're right? If you hear that and you hear a negative thought, if your perspective is kind of negative, because right now you might be dealing with a scenario and your immediate brain went to negativity. I want to give you a little bit of neuroscience, and then I'm also talk to you about the other side of this. Your brain is built to do one thing and one thing only: survive. You have a innate survival mode button. And anytime you're faced with something new, whether it's new information, a new experience, or the same experience, but you're afraid of it, it's because it's recalling something from the safety mode in your brain. That's a default that we all have. Our brains are literally built to survive. How do I know this? You can get in a car wreck, and the first thing your brain does is shut everything else down to survive. We call that a coma. What is it doing? It shuts the rest of your body down that takes a lot of energy and only preserves what it needs to function, your vital organs. We call that a coma. So you get into an accident, right? And it's a head-on collision or whatever, right? And your brain feels that moment, right? Because it's a shock. Your brain doesn't go, oh yeah, we'll be okay. Your brain goes, uh-oh, I just felt something. I got to shut all the way down. So your brain is built to survive. So if I say to you, what if you're right? And maybe the scenario you're thinking about your head right now, when I asked that at the beginning, you're facing something that makes you afraid. It's not the fear that's real. It's not the feeling. It's the right here. It's the perspective. Because in your mind you're recalling the scenario, but the frame by which you deal with that scenario is the perspective, and it's telling you. Remember the first one, what it means. It's assuming the next time, and it also gives you the feeling, so you can feel it in your body, right? You ever been to a movie? Let's say you're watching a scary movie, and you already know, you walk in knowing there's suspense, there's probably gonna be some loud moments, some quiet moments, and then a big scare. But what happens while the moment is approaching? You feel your body tense up. Your breath starts to shorten. And even though you know the murderer is getting ready to come around that corner, because you hear do you know they do sound science with movies? So basically they know the pitch to have one of those hissing sounds or one of those loud sounds to have with no sounds, and kind of the creaking of leaves and everything else, right? Like they know what to do to draw you into the scene. And then that big bang, right? And then everybody jumps in the movie theater and everybody goes crazy, right? Like, but that's based on actual science of how the brain works, how the ear works, how they're trying to get your body to react to the scene in a movie. So when I ask you, what if you're right? Your body's going to react a certain way. Because right now you're dealing with a scenario. It could be good, bad, indifferent, or whatever. So I wanted to give you that side of it. Let's look at that same question. And what if, right? So we're going to play the what if game a little bit. What if your default changed? What if you changed your default from being one of the feeling of fear, of nervousness, of anxiety, or whatever when someone asks that question? What if you trained your brain to change its default response to what if I'm right? Because the truth of the matter is, what if I'm right, depending on how it's asked, if I change the inflection, if I change the pitch, it changes how I communicate it. But for you, based on the scenario that you might be dealing with, you'll interpret it through the perspective that you have. So I could say, what if I'm right? I'm questioning the question, right? I'm questioning the question. You as the interpreter are using the perspective, and whatever scenario comes to your mind at that moment, then you run through those three questions basically, and that's the result that you're left with, the reality that you're in. But if I said, what if I'm right? The way I communicate it might help you change your default response to the question. So let's talk about our default perspectives for a second. What if you're right? Normally, most people think of something negative. What if, let's do this, we're going to do this exercise, okay? What if you're right? Instead of automatically going to something that's a negative connotation, what if you looked at these same three questions and answered them for yourself instead of letting your default operating system do it for you? I want to use these same three questions, okay? Let's start from the bottom. What if you're right? The feeling. Why don't I start leveraging positive feelings? What if you're right? Maybe you're getting ready to jump into that side business. Maybe you're getting ready to ask her on a date. Maybe you're getting ready to commit, right, to something or someone. Maybe you're going to go and apply for that job promotion. Maybe you're going to, whatever, right? If we start asking the question, let's start from the bottom. Because the scenario is, whatever your scenario is when I ask the question, the perspective is your reality. Scenario doesn't have to change. It's your perspective that changes all the time, right? So, from a positive standpoint, what positive feelings can I start to tell myself about that question? Well, maybe I'm going to start saying, maybe I'm going to start having feelings of joy. Maybe it's going to give me a sense of calm. Maybe I'm going to start feeling an elongated way of breathing and breathe into the moment. What if the question of what am I, it gives me a feeling. What if I turn that into the feeling of confidence? You know, confidence does have a feeling. I know it's a word, but you have it has a feeling to it, right? Confident people. You can write the words that go with that are associated with that, right? So, what if you're right? Assumes the next time. Think about it from a positive perspective. This is what's really cool. So it assumes the next time. Here's what's really cool. On the negative side, you've already assumed that the same scenario, if I do it again, it's going to go bad. What about this though? What if assumes the next time? What if I change my perspective and I say, well, I might have failed the last time, but now I learned something in that failure. So let me go try it again. See how different that is? And because too many of us are avoiding, okay, here we go. Too many of us are avoiding one scenario all of our lives. Think about that. You're probably doing it right now. You can think of a scenario that happened to you one time, and the perspective, the frame that you put around that is your perspective. So you've spent your entire life ensuring to avoid one scenario. And you've chosen to do it. You do it every day. But if I go from the positive perspective and I say, it assumes the next time, now what if I assume that now with my learnings of what happened the first time, I take it into the second time out, right? With our kids, they're learning to ride a bike. You already know when they say they want to learn to ride a bike, they're going to fall, hit the curb, skin a knee, hit their head, tear up an elbow. They're going to tear up a tree. They're probably going to hit your car. Like, you know this going in, but you don't stop your child from doing it a second time and a third time and a fifth time. You don't stop your son, from playing football after the first time he really didn't like it because it hurt and he was sore. You let him get back out there. Why? Because you're trying to get him to build up his resilience, right? If your daughter's playing a sport, or, some of us don't like for our children to quit early, right? Like, I don't like for my kids to quit. So when we tell them, hey, if you're going to do this sport, you're going to stick with it all the way through the season, buddy. Okay? There's no quit. It sucks when they get a little older and you're like, all right, if you're not going to do it, then that's fine. But, when they're young, what are you trying to do? You're trying to get them to honor their commitments. So what do? The scenario is sports for our children. They had a bad experience at practice or in a game or whatever, right? And now their perspective is, this is too hard, I want to quit. Well, what do we do as parents? We try to, this is why I'm telling you, perspective is so powerful, and I hope that this drawing and this video is making sense to you because it's so powerful. We do it with our kids. If I use these same 3 questions with my kids, what am I trying to do? What does it mean to them that now they have this perspective around playing sports? Well, now they're trying to attach a negative meaning. Well, I don't want to do it because maybe it's too hard, or they want to quit early or whatever. What are we trying to do? We're trying to get them to change their perspective by going through these 3 things. They're saying to themselves, this is too hard, I want to quit. You're going, I need you to change that, son, daughter. I need you to stick with it and fight through it. Why? Because what you know is, if this perspective hardens, that it's hard, it will leak into other parts of their lives. And now every time they go up against something, they're going to quit, right? Second question, your child is, struggling with the sports and all those other things, right? It assumes the next time. So if you let this perspective of something being hard and I just want to quit cement, they will ensure that every time something is hard, a test, homework assignment, friends, or whatever, they just won't do it. They'll quit. You're trying to avoid that. What are you trying to do? You're trying to change their perspective. The scenario is not going to change. It will change how it shows up, but they'll always be in the same scenario, right? It gives you a feeling. They might have a feeling of doubt, fear, anxiety, or whatever, right, around the sport that they're feeling like they don't want to play anymore. What are you trying to do? You're trying to change the way they feel about it by getting them to push through it. That's interesting. I just did this whole, walkthrough, and you understood it about your children. But yet, as grown adults, we won't do this for ourselves. We won't do this for ourselves. So I wanted to give you this exercise. Like, do this for yourself. Draw this out. Put down these 3 questions and write the scenario in the middle. What is the scenario right now that you're facing? Right? All right. So now let's get to the other side of this. All right. So the scenario is starting a side business is really hard while I have a job. I don't know what to do. I haven't seen somebody successful around me, or I tried it before and it failed, right? I tried to do something online business, building websites, and I didn't do too well. I didn't get a lot of people, so I just quit, right? I tried to, do a little lawn service on the side, after work hours, and it just didn't work out, so I kind of quit, right? So the scenario is something of, hey, I tried a side business before and it didn't work. So what is your perspective now as a result? And you know what? Here's the funny part. Sometimes I'll have conversations with people and it was 10 years ago. That was the last time they ran across that scenario. You know why it was 10 years ago that they ran across that scenario? Because their perspective that they allowed cement around that scenario, they spent 10 years avoiding that scenario. Crazy is that? And we all do it. We're all guilty. Okay, so I'm not telling you something that's like, we all do it. We all have scenarios that because we had a negative experience with it, we've let that be the frame around that scenario, and then we we put a lot of energy into avoiding that because we never want to feel that again. By the way, that can work good for you, right? So if you grew up in poverty, right? There's some people running to something and from something. Some people, their scenario is, I grew up in poverty. So the perspective that they have when they finally got older is, I'm going to get a job and I'm never going to be broke again. That is their perspective. So every time something happens or they run into a situation or money gets tight, they're willing to do whatever it takes because of that scenario being broke when they were smaller. So what they do, what does it mean to them to be broke? I'm not able to take care of myself, or I'm less than, I'm not worthy to take myself out to eat. I'm not worthy to buy myself, some nice pair of shoes, whatever, right? Like whatever, right? I may have depression, right? Whatever, right? They assume the next time, right, that I won't be in this situation. So what I'm gonna do, my perspective is, I'm gonna make sure that there won't be a next time that I'm broke. What is the feeling it gives them? It gives them the feeling of depression, of hopelessness, of unworthiness when I'm broke, right? So there are some people who've used the scenario of poverty to skyrocket their finances because they're doing everything they can to avoid being broke again, right? Some people have had the scenario of having money and then losing it all. So the perspective now is, money ain't everything, so they avoid ever opportunities where they're going to make a lot of money or hearing about things. They keep things just kind of idle, right? It would be kind of like if you were in a car with somebody and You're on the highway sign says drive 70, but because maybe they got into an accident one time in their life, that's the scenario. The perspective is never drive the speed limit again. So they drive only 40. And I know I'm being facetious, but think about it, right? That's what we do. You see how powerful, like, I promise you, perspective is the greatest superpower ever. Perspective is the greatest superpower ever. So I wanted to leave you with this. So you do this at work, like, honestly, like, write down a scenario, ask yourself, what is the perspective I have around this as a result? And then write down these three questions. What does it mean to me? What am I assuming about the next time I run into that scenario? And what are the feelings that are associated with that perspective? I'm just asking you to challenge yourself. That's it. I just want you to challenge yourself in the way you are approaching life, because you could be forfeiting some great experiences because you're avoiding scenarios that happened to you 10, 12 years ago. And there's a life meant for you when you change that mode of operation. That's all, again, your brain loves comfort and safety. Okay? So if you go through a traumatic moment, for whatever the case may be, your brain is always going to remind you, you're going to get the pit sweats. You're going to start, feeling a little crazy. You're going to start feeling a little nervous when you run up against that scenario, right? Like, for example, what I am doing right now is really something that came to me like minutes before I decided to hop on here live. It's scary to some people. Like, they will start sweating and fumbling their words, and they won't be able to get out what they're trying to communicate because they're afraid of the camera. Why? Because maybe their scenario is they've told themselves, maybe they didn't look good on camera one time, or maybe it just was terrible that one time. And so what they do is, their perspective is, I don't look good on camera. That's now their perspective when they went, when they did something, and now everything they can, they'll avoid it like the plague, right? Here's something I want you to understand about your perspective, though. The perspective that you have today could be costing you the very life that you're frustrated that you don't have. Because you won't go back. You won't go back and do that scenario again with a different perspective. This is why I think perspective is a superpower. It is by far, I'm having to change my perspective about money. I'm having it, and within that, there's a few things like how it works, what I should be using it for, and the way I see money flowing. Right? I've had to change my perspective on money. That's not easy, right? Big numbers. So, okay, I'll share with you. What does it mean to me with money? Money, because I didn't grow up with it, or because it's always been hard to come by. I would normally have like a scarcity mentality. That's what it means. So being laid off twice from corporate America with very little money, my perspective is, when you get it, hold on to it. That's my perspective, right? That's what it means to me. And then I assume that the next time I get some money, hold on to it. And the feeling that it gives me is a false sense of security because I held on to it, not realizing money should move. So, for example, if I put a glass of water next to you and we're sitting outside, but I tell you that, hey, keep that glass, that water in that glass. Okay? Like, don't drink it. There's no top on it. Don't drink it. You don't want to be without water. And a week later, no top on it, it's sitting outside, and the water's still sitting there. 2 weeks later, a month later, 5 weeks later, 50 years later, that same glass of water. And I'm like, now, okay, now drink it. Would you drink it? No, you wouldn't. You're like, man, this water been sitting outside. It's been stale. What do you mean? It hasn't moved. And water that's just sitting creates bacteria, stuff gets in it, and then unfortunately it becomes you can't drink it. You're unable to drink it. That's what I'm learning about money. Money is supposed to be moving. Money is never meant to be stagnant. I'm learning that because I'm changing my perspective about money. Okay, so do this exercise with yourself. Pick a scenario and do it, and see what you come up with. See what you come up with. You might be surprised that there might be perspectives running in your subconscious that you didn't recognize until you consciously did the exercise and realized, oh man, I'm running with a negative mindset towards that, and maybe that's why I'm avoiding it. Maybe that's why I don't challenge myself. Maybe that's why I don't do hard things. Right? And if your side business is gonna be successful, if your marriage, if you just as a human being, if at your job, if you're gonna be successful in any version of success, you're gonna have to really change your perspective on whatever the scenario is. Your brain wants comfort. Your brain is trying to keep you safe. Everything you want is in uncomfortable situations that aren't safe. Meaning, yes, you're going to take some risk. Children take risk all the time. A 6-year-old would jump off a bed, a bunk bed at the top, break his elbow, and cry and moan, and it hurts, and got a big owie, and then 2 weeks later go right back up to the top. Why? They just don't have any fear. They're like, yeah, it happened once, but I like jumping from up here. Okay, well, you're going to figure it out, right? My little nephew, he does that right now. He flips over the front of our couch, right? And to him, I'm just having fun. But there have been times when he fell on top of his head, and it's like, well, he's learning. He's figuring it out. And granted, it's funny, it's scary, right? Because you don't want him to hurt himself. But I realize, no, he's operating with a level of less fear than I am as an adult. Yeah, I might know some things, but at least he's not running around afraid of every little thing, right? We as parents are providing the guardrails and probably our own fears about what might happen. So we end up shaping his world, right? But I think it's important that we realize there was a time in your life where you were fearless, because your perspective about life and those experiences, right, were different. So anyway, I hope this is helpful to you. This just kind of hit me, and I was like, I got to get this out. And I wanted to share it with you. So that's why I wanted to do this live. So, hey, listen, thank you so much for listening. If you're catching this on the replay, just, tell me down in the comments what, how this may have resonated with you. What did you learn about yourself, maybe running through this exercise? And more importantly, tell somebody about this particular episode. If you like what you heard, hey, trust me, there's tons more here on the podcast. You can go back through some of my episodes. But I got some really big announcements coming up, so stay tuned for that. And other than that, you have a great, incredible day. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the World According to Chris, your number one source for helping you find and build the perfect side business. So you can always tune in, tap in, go to my website, twac.live. You can see all of our information and our content there. But subscribe, man, subscribe. Down below, hit the subscribe button that way, and then hit the notifications bell so that way you always know when we're live. Thanks so much for watching. I'm out. Peace.